We open up chapter 240 of Jujutsu Kaisen with a quick flashback that was absolutely needed because after the battle of Gojo versus Sukuna ended in a heartbreak, the question on everyone's mind was where were the others at, because it was pretty obvious that their only hope to defeat Sukuna would to be jump Sukuna after Gojo warmed down like we had earlier been told. Yet instead we got Hikari providing some cover for Kashimo to shoot a shot against Sukuna and eventually fall to Sukuna, which led to Yuji and Higuruma stepping up to face Sukuna next. But the heavy hitters like Maki and Yuta, they were nowhere to be seen alongside Hikari, and now we know there's a reason for this. It was all part of Angel's plan. Angel reveals to us that she's run through all the data and the probable scenarios and outcomes and says that if they were to all just gang up on Sukuna in the scenario that Gojo dies, they'd all be too injured to stop Kenjaku, and she says that that's the more troublesome thing to worry about, because if Kenjaku is successful, then he'll merge Japan with Master Tengen and make this giant cursed spirit, and if that happens, it's checkmate, game over. While she does have this rather doom and gloom perspective, it's coldly logical, and it's something that the cast surrounded around her actually need to hear, because with the stakes this high, they do have to be extremely careful. Sukuna on his own is a handful, and so too is Kenjaku, but having to deal with both back to back is a nightmare, so you have to approach it in a calculated manner. We briefly see Yuta declaring that because himself and Hikari are around, that means that Kenjaku won't be able to complete his plans, and it shows confidence, while also continuously hinting at what the narrative appears to be setting up, which is an eventual Kenjaku versus Yuta fight in the future. However, Angel reveals that her trump card isn't either one of them. It's Takaba, and she says that his curse technique is the reason she's so confident. But she warns him that Takaba can never know about the specifics of his curse technique, and it's when we jump into the battle of Takaba versus Kenjaku that we see exactly why Angel said what she said about Takaba, about him never being able to know the truth about his curse technique, because if he does, it's going to fall apart, because it relies so heavily on his own ignorance. Essentially, Takaba's curse technique only works as long as he thinks that he's funny or what he's saying is funny. He's like that guy that you see in the room who's constantly telling jokes and he's the only one laughing at his own jokes, or people are just looking at him and they're laughing, trying not to hurt his feelings. While he's not that overflowing with confidence, the things that he imagines are basically turned into reality to support the joke that he's saying. It's such an overpowered ability, but it's extremely simple, and that's what makes it so brilliant. But what's also equally brilliant is that its weakness in of itself is also just as extremely simple. And as Kenjaku's battling against Takaba, he finds himself banging his head against the wall, trying to discern what it is his curse technique is and trying to figure out the weakness behind it, because an ability like this is a problem even for some of the strongest characters in the verse like Kenjaku. He even says as much himself. He's been around for 1,000 years and he's never seen anyone with a technique like this, and it's given him a problem to a point that his own curse techniques are being reflected, and at one point he's even got a bandana on his head that has the American flag on it. You have to think that the actions of Takaba are making it that much more annoying for someone like Kenjaku. Before Takaba showed up, he was this super serious thinking character, thinking about where someone like Maki could be and keeping his guard up. Yeah, he goofed off a little bit when he was watching Gojo get killed by Sukuna, but for the most part cold and calculated. But then you have Takaba there fighting you and being super unserious while he's battling you, and there's no rhyme or reason to his actions. He's getting under Kenjaku's skin the same way Dominic Mysterio gets under the skin of baby faces in the WWE roster right now. It's all based on a whim. Normally when you see people fighting Jujutsu Kaisen, you pay close attention and you can see that there's a combat strategy being laid out, and it becomes a jujitsu chess match between those two people. Each person is using their own curse techniques to try and get a checkmate on the other, but this time there's no rhyme or reason to it. The battle goes as Takaba goes, and for a while he does have the upper hand, and he's driving someone as super logical as Kenjaku completely up the wall. However, Angel's worry about Takaba does prove to be very warranted, but not because he can't ever know about his curse technique like she was saying. Instead, it's rather because he talks too much. Without realizing it, he gives Kenjaku all the information he needs to figure out about the curse technique that's being used, and I actually think this is very poetic when you sit down and you think about it, because here's the thing. There's an expression that I like to say, which is that you never speak until it's time to say checkmate. You never let people know what your next moves are. You never speak too much and reveal too much about yourself, because as long as once there's an aura of mystery around you, people can't quite figure you out. People have to be on guard around you. People are never sure where they actually stand with you, and that actually gives you leverage. But when you have someone like this who's continuously talking, they reveal things about themselves that they wouldn't otherwise do if they were actually thinking. Takaba does it while he's talking about himself, and he ends up both revealing the weakness about his technique as well as his own personal insecurity about himself in the process. He says that he's got into the first round of the competition of a TV show that was known for being funny because of how untalented the performers were, and it's then that Takaba's able to put all the pieces together, because he's like, wait a second, that TV show, it's only funny not because you're funny, but because you just aren't funny. And because he put those pieces together, and Takaba continues trying to talk himself up, seeming above the fray, seeming like a true comedian, projecting that false confidence, trying to hide the fact that he secretly knows he might not be that funny. He's trying to prove that he's funny so hard. And in that moment, Kenjaku realizes Takaba really wants to be a comedian. He really wants to be funny. He wants people to like his jokes, but he just sucks. Like clockwork, when Takaba makes another unfunny joke about words being written on Kenjaku's face after Kenjaku explains the why behind his plans to merge people with Master Tengen, Kenjaku has a light bulb go off in his head, and he makes another calculated decision and begins to start stripping away Takaba's ability by getting serious and getting Takaba out of his tune mode, if you will, where he's living in the moment and focusing solely on being funny, because Kenjaku's challenging him with logic, and his comedy is being challenged by Kenjaku, and his feelings and his pride are being hurt by Kenjaku. He's coming off like that studio exec who didn't find any of Takaba's jokes funny, and the scenario even evolves physically to reflect the audition between a casting director and a talent, and Kenjaku just uses that cold logic again and again to start taking him out of his element. The mind games and how it's used to dive into the characterization of these two polar opposite characters is actually brilliant writing by Gege Akutami here. In short, Kenjaku is now back in control of the fight, and by the time that Takaba is trying to reestablish himself, Kenjaku kicks him again by winning the joke contest, like making the funny face and exposing some of his brain by removing the top off of his head where the stitches are. And when Takaba loses by laughing, he just levels him with the attack. It's mental warfare, and it shows why Angel was so worried about Takaba's technique being known to him, because it relies on his ego, it relies on his ignorance and the belief that he's actually funny. And the more riled up he gets, like trying to tell Kenjaku, you know nothing about comedy because you've never told us a joke on a stage before. It's easier to have someone like Kenjaku actually get inside of your head at that point and keep you from using your curse technique, especially when you yourself don't even know how your curse technique works. That ultimately leads to Kenjaku running down Takaba like he's a lion stalking its prey on that huge cliffhanger ending of that chapter. I like that this chapter does a really good job of hinting that Kenjaku is final villain material, while also showcasing part of what makes him such a really good antagonist, which is his logical approach as well as his whimsical way in the way that he does things as well, while still being ever so calculated. I also like that this chapter has Yuta saying that him and Hikari are enough to prevent victory for the other side, which makes you as a reader ask the question, if hypothetically, if Hikari and Yuta actually teamed up, could they defeat either Sukuna or Kenjaku? I think they might have had a chance if they teamed up against Kenjaku, but Hiei and Era transformed Sukuna would absolutely dust them in my opinion. But maybe that's just me. That fight with Sukuna, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a competitive fight, whereas the other hypothetical fight with Kenjaku would be competitive. I think the other thing that we're seeing is that by this being a flashback chapter, it's taking place after Sukuna versus Gojo ends with Gojo getting chopped in half, and likely while Sukuna versus Kashimo is fighting, just given that Kenjaku seems to be taking down Takaba relatively easily, and it mirrors Sukuna doing the same to Kashimo. A little bit of trouble for a second, but then you regain the advantage. So this might be a situation where this fight ends and then we jump back to the cliffhanger of Yuji and Higuruma versus Sukuna, or we get into the middle of that fight. And that's actually gonna be my chapter question, you guys. Do you guys think we should pick back up at the start of that fight, or should the narrative leave that bit to our imagination, just open up midway through the Higuruma and Yuji versus Sukuna fight? Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Meanwhile, don't forget to check out these other Jujutsu Kaisen videos you see on the screen right now.